Eric Eager from SumerSports is with us right now. Eric, thanks for jumping on with us. We appreciate it, man.
Hey, fellas. It's good to see you guys.
So I should also mention, make sure you follow him on Twitter at Eric Eager with an underscore at the end. You're definitely going to be following him over the next few weeks as all this stuff starts to fly in. Yesterday was a busy day, Eric. We've been talking a little bit about the Lamar Jackson situation. I actually want to start with Daniel Jones, though. I don't really like what they did. The argument I just made is take the names out of it. The process of being in a hurry to pay a quarterback that probably still needs to prove himself more just so you can franchise tag a running back. I just don't like the process there. And I understand it's a little different because Saquon Barkley's the best running back that was going to hit the market. But I don't know. What did you think about how that all unfolded with the Giants yesterday?
Yeah, there was an executive in the league that I was talking to just about a half hour ago that says as he was reading the contract, it kept getting worse. And for the Daniel Jones situation, it's crazy. I mean, Joe Shane in a press conference, I think earlier today, said, look, if we knew what we knew now, we would have exercised the fifth-year option on Daniel Jones, which I think obviously makes sense, but it also says, how much are we overreacting to sort of one season samples? He had 3 years to decide whether or not you wanted him for a fifth year at a relatively reduced rate, considering what they ended up with him for. He has one season where, I know he looked, very tough. I think he had a very Alex Smith type season, but he's still only 15 touchdown passes, still only 9 wins. Rest of the roster that they need to rebuild to a certain extent. You belly up and give him, 40 a year and kind of 45, I think is the number this year. And then you go non-exclusive tag on Saquon Barkley, which actually to me is not a bad number, but it also sends a bad message to Barkley. Like, hey, we like you, but if somebody came over and offered 2 first-round picks, which no one will, we feel like that's worth more to us than, giving you an extra $2-3 million. So it was a really weird day for the Giants. And I wonder if we look back on this day, 3-4 years from now, we all look back and say, well, was the Joe Shane era kind of like ended on March 7th of 2023?
Eric, go ahead.
No, that's just that. Gives me Ryan Pace the day he drafted Mitch Trubisky vibes with people, just wondering what this is going to look like down the road. It's very interesting.
Yep, for sure. And all right, Lamar, Eric, who in your mind is most likely looking at their needs and their salary cap structure to make a play at perhaps getting him out of Baltimore? Does anyone jump to the forefront?
Yeah, it looks like a lot of people right now are not, leaning in against. The Bears have made a commitment to Justin Fields, which is great. I mean, they would have been probably the one that had the best opportunity. I think you look at the Falcons with about $61 million in effective cap space. That is one, because right now, I mean, basically what they're trying to do in Baltimore is lessen the blow on the Ravens, where Lamar's camp basically thinks the Ravens are a villain. If the rest of the league says, yeah, but we're not giving you a guaranteed deal either, he'll come back to Baltimore and maybe they'll, the one you're with is sort of better than the grass on the other side. So I think that's what they're trying to do. But there are some teams that can kind of poison pill the Ravens. I mean, namely Atlanta, Houston, teams like that all need a quarterback. They can give a deal that is, kind of what Lamar wants, but is structured in a way that Baltimore can't really match, because it's not really, you have to match the actual contract that's offered. And the Ravens right now, because of the Roquan Smith deal, they had a ton of cap space going into the offseason. They don't have as much. If they were to sign Lamar as is, it would require some sort of structure where the first few years are a little bit less of a dent than the subsequent years.
When you look at the wide receiver landscape across the NFL, teams are shelling out a lot of money for wide receiver, which is why you don't see any available in free agency. The Bears gave up a second-round pick for Chase Claypool to try to get ahead of this market, Calvin Ridley with the Jaguars. Do you think the Bears might have to, let's say they trade back to a spot like 9, would it be in their interest to reach for a wide receiver like Jackson Smith and Jigba, because now you, like quarterbacks, you can have a wide receiver for 5 years before you have to pay him?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that the wide receiver landscape is different depending upon where you are in the quarterback development cycle. So, we all look at Mahomes and how they kind of built the wide receiver core in the aggregate after Tyreek Hill, but then Tyreek Hill goes to the Dolphins, and him and Waddle are able to elevate a quarterback who's younger, much like Fields is. And even look at Stephon Diggs. He went to Buffalo and turned Josh Allen into a great quarterback. I think where the Bears are, you need kind of like one bona fide guy that he can throw to on late downs. Not having depth is maybe not necessarily as bad. Not having depth is sort of what has hurt Green Bay in the past. Once you get to the playoffs, I think depth at wide receiver matters more than the star power. But when you're building, I think star power matters a lot. So yeah, if you look, I would say, this is a place where they could look at DeAndre Hopkins. He is 19.5 million cap hit this year if they were to trade for him. I think that they're looking for a second, but maybe, it's something like 2/3 or a future pick could be the thing there. And the Bears have money to spend. They're one of the rare teams in the NFL where if they were to acquire a veteran, a locker room kind of guy, it wouldn't be so bad. So I think that, in the place where they kind of are, let's say they trade back to like 4 or 9 or something like that, I don't know if they're in a good spot to get a wide receiver that can add value early, but they could probably bring in a veteran or wait until the later rounds and get somebody who sort of fits with the rest of their group. But, they need a wide receiver that Fields can go to sort of in crunch time.
Eric, when we talked to you in Phoenix, you and Tom Dimitrov kind of had a little back and forth on the Justin Fields situation. You certainly kind of argued from the analytical contract side of things, and he argued a little bit more on like what it could do to the locker room and just like the clout he's already built inside House Hall. I think both sides of that conversation are worth listening to. We now have more context, especially after being in Indianapolis last week, that, okay, this is the route the Bears are going. It's not happening. They're going to stay with Fields and, probably try to trade back in the draft. Now, like, has anything you've heard or conversations you've had in the last month or so changed your perspective at all on this? How do you feel about the direction that Ryan Poles is going to go with Justin Fields?
It's clear that I think that he's been told that he can get more for the first pick than he can get for Fields. And I think that was very much part of the thought process. There is a locker room component to it. There also, to me now, I think the biggest question is, do they trade the pick in the coming weeks, much like, San Francisco did with the Trey Lance pick, the Jets did with the Sam Darnold pick. Do they entice a team to move up and get in that spot early? Because I do think that the longer you don't do that, you do get some questions on Fields because he can say whatever he wants about Fields and they can report everything they want about Fields. But until he actually trades the first pick, I think people are going to still leave open a little bit of, well, if a team comes in and offers a lot, like let's say Baltimore loses Lamar and the Ravens want Fields to run that offense, like the door is still open now, right? If they trade the pick, not only can they plan around it in free agency, but the door is closed and everything is committed to Justin Fields. To me, I think that's the next big question here is, do they trade the pick early and sort of plan, or even plan for another trade back? Let's say the Colts were to trade with them from 4 to 1. Do they then kind of maneuver on draft day to move back from 4, given what happens in free agency? I think those are the interesting questions now. I think you're probably 99.9% on Fields now, which I think is again Poles doing his due diligence in the market and probably making the best decision there. But from here, it's like I think that they create a bidding war for the pick. There is a little bit of showing your hand that lowers the value of the pick. And so I think that for them, there's probably some value in just getting done with it now and planning for the future.
Do you have a guess on who, let me rephrase. If you had a guess on who the Bears deal with, who do you think it is?
I would say Colts are my favorite right now. But I think if I were betting, I think you get a better price on Carolina doing something from 9 to 1. I know we brought up Brian Burns as like a possible, the Bears need veterans that cost money because you just don't get value in free agency for guys like that. If you look at like the edge class in free agency, like you're looking at like Frank Clark versus a guy like Brian Burns. So Carolina to me is a dark horse. I think that Carolina needs to start anew at quarterback, and the Bears pick is the best way to do so.
Let me just get clarity on one thing here, and maybe I'm the only one that needs it, but there's a lot of, the Bears have to spend money. they can, in theory, right? They can restructure. They can extend Cole Kmet. They can extend Darnell Mooney, and that will count towards the salary for. They don't necessarily have to go out and overpay for a free agent. They could take care of their own, right?
Yeah, they can, but those aren't blue chip players, right? Those are good players, and the kind of players that hit free agency are generally speaking the Orlando Browns of the world, right? The DJ Charks of the world, right? Christian Kirk was one, right? So last year, Christian Kirk commanded $20 million APY from the Jaguars, and like he's a nice player, but I think they're going to end up regretting that deal. The Bears, what you don't want to do is look at your $100 million and say, okay, it's burning a hole in our pocket. Every 3 years, you have to spend a certain amount of the salary cap, 90% rolling average of that. You don't want to go out and be like, you don't want to go out and end up being the Tampa Bay Bucks from 2014 and having Michael Johnson, Alteron Werner, Brandon Myers, and Clinton McDonald and be like, hey, we won. And then like 3 of those guys are gone because they're not worthy of those deals. So to me, I think that's where if you can pick up a couple blue chip players and use the number 1 pick to do so, and guys who are going to be sort of worth those high dollar amounts, that's much better than going in free agency and just paying a premium for a guy like Orlando Brown or paying a premium for a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster or somebody like that.
I got it. I mean, would you overpay for Draymond Jones?
He's a good ball player. I just don't think in the history of the NFL a team has ever come out of a bidding war for a non 10 out of 10 player and thought, hey, ended up winning that, right? No one ended up, not regretting those kind of moves. So again, that's a tough position for the Bears because they do have the money and it's burning a hole in their pocket, theoretically. So I would caution against that.
Yeah, you can count that on like probably one hand of the times it's actually worked out. Actually, the Bears were involved in one of them. I'd say Julius Peppers worked out, but that's really the exception to the free agency rule, and that's where if you can get creative and find somebody through a trade, that's good. You got to pay. You would pay him right away because the team trading that player away can't do it now, but that's what you're looking for like a year from now, but that's not always easy to do either. And
just for the record, I'm not looking to overpay Kmet or overpay Mooney. I'm just looking to get a deal done that they would be willing to do at this point.
Well, if you can front load those deals, that's what works, right? So the Bears are in a position now they're in the opposite position of most teams where when you extend a player, you're generally bringing the number down in year 1 to something else, and you're smoothing over the year charges. I mean, if you can just go and say, look, we're going to give Cole Kmet a lump sum, but those there are rules about like your year 1 salary can't be this percentage of a year 2 salary. So it is, even then you can't gimmick the cap that much. Like if you're going to give out these big deals to players, they better be worth it. And it's just really hard for teams with that much cap. I mean, you basically have 3.5, top of market deals to give out. And, there's not 3.5 top of market players in free agency. And so that's always the risk that you have.
Would you, what's the value on David Montgomery to the Bears? The running game really carried this team and helps Justin Fields with his development. So, what's the value to David Montgomery staying with Chicago?
Yeah, I mean, if you look, because it's a great question. I think in a weird way, the running back position is less important when the quarterback has the kind of gravity in the run game that Justin Fields has, meaning like linebackers stick in the mud quick more often. And so you look at, like, if you go to Pro Football Focus, you look at yards before contact per carry. It's always like the Ravens running backs. It's always the Bears running backs. It's always the Cardinals running backs because linebackers are so scared of the quarterback backdooring them in the run game that in a weird way, a guy like Montgomery, who's a good ball player, I mean, he's had a great Bears career, like a guy like Khalil Herbert actually had a better season than him efficiency-wise last year. So it's with respect to the Bears, I don't think he has a ton of value relative to where he would in other places. But they do need running backs, of course, because they are going to center the offense around the quarterback run game, and you need at least a credible threat next to him. But I don't think Montgomery specifically is going to be worth the price point that he's going to command, especially in lieu of Khalil Herbert, who was fantastic last year.
That's interesting. Go ahead,
Eric. One of our live viewers here has I guess it has more to do with the draft than free agency, but is jumped in here with a super chat about how far back the Bears might be able to go and still get Jackson Smith and Jigba in round 1. He's been first of all, tied to the Bears because of his history with Justin Fields. That's obvious. Fields has, I think both players would probably like to play with each other, I should say. And it's interesting because I've seen a lot of wide ranges for Jackson Smith and Jigba, like late first round, potentially all the way up 10. You were talking about wide receivers earlier. How would you handle that?
Yeah. By the way, there's another player with ties to Justin Fields from their Georgia high school days, McCole Hardman, who's going to be a free agent. That's one to look out for if you're a Bears fan. From Kansas City, very good, like horizontal wide receiver. Smith and Jigba, I think, is a guy who's going to get drafted higher than we think. Last year, you had Chris Olave, who was actually the third most productive of the Ohio State receivers in 2021. He went higher and with a trade up than some of his contemporaries, other than Drake London and Garrett Wilson. So I think Smith and Jigba, like, they're going to overlook the lack of production last year, the injury, the sitting out, much the same way that Jamar Chase did in 2020. I think he's going to go high. So if you go back to 9 to 11 and you take him there, I think people will raise an eyebrow initially, but I don't think the Bears will regret it a bit.
I said that I think yesterday or Monday on the show that Smith and Jigba at 9, and there was some pushback, but like that would be, in my mind, what just got laid out a home run for the Bears. You trade back, at least Bears fans would love it in the moment. I'm not saying it would work out perfectly, but if you traded back and that was the pick, Bears. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think Bears fans would be jumping up and down.
Right, Eric? Where like if you're a fan base who just has that pick, like it somewhere in 9 through 11, like you just said, and that's your first pick, and you're kind of reaching for a wide receiver, maybe, or at least that's how it would come off publicly. You probably have some fans that are like, "What are we doing?" But if you're the Bears and you trade back, you get those 2 future first-round picks that Ryan Poles clearly wants, and then you make that move, everybody's happy.
Sign Orlando Brown, who Gary Ross doesn't want, but the offense loading up. I'm sorry, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, the poster that has Mooney, Kmet, Smith and Jigba, Claypool, and Fields will look nice, right? And that I think is kind of where you look at, okay, now that offense has some real weapons. You have to worry about the offensive line, but Fields is kind of a wild card there in terms of how well he runs. He did take the biggest sack rate in football last year, but you can I think you can get guards and centers in free agency. And so if you use the draft, that won't look so bad, to Bears fans when you come up for air and say, oh, those are some weapons for them, especially in an NFC North where the secondaries are all bad.
Eric, I've been following you guys since we talked at the Super Bowl, all the great content that SumerSports has been putting out, but you can explain it better than me. What should our viewers, our listeners be looking for right now with you guys?
Yeah, for sure. So we're a company. We were founded by Paul Tudor Jones, who is a macro trader. Our day-to-day work is working on optimization tools for NFL teams, but we have started a sort of a forward-facing content site at SumerSports.com. At SumerSports on Twitter. We're basically, just trying to write some educational articles. We talked about weak link systems. The other day, we talked about what yards after the catch, how do you attribute them to wide receivers versus quarterbacks versus play callers. We also have a podcast called the SumerSports Show, which is on every Monday and Wednesday, where me and Thomas sort of argue over player evaluations, he being a former GM and a scout, and me being an analytics guy. It's a lot of fun, and we're really excited about the future at the company.
Yeah, so this is information that teams are actually seeking out. You guys are providing. You're helping these NFL teams get as much as they want to maximize the amount of information they can get. So it's really good stuff. I encourage everybody to check it out. Again, follow Eric on Twitter at Eric Eager with an underscore at the end, and SumerSports is spelled SUMER at SumerSports on Twitter as well. Make sure you're checking it out. Eric, thanks so much for jumping on with us again. I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
I would just say our new bestie, we became friends at the Super Bowl, and look at us now. This is just we're growing, Eric. Look at this.
Yeah, this is awesome. Well, I really love what you guys are doing too. I think it's so cool that these local content creators are popping up, because I think you guys do a great job. So thanks for having me on, and we'll talk soon, fellas.